This presentation is obviously entitled A Pathway to Wisdom. Everyone experiencing this presentation has one major characteristic in common. We are all, for the moment at least, alive. So long as things are going well on an individual basis, that is very desirable and important, but it seems that there is a widespread disagreement as to the uniqueness of this on or off condition. On can be quite miserable, and there is considerable disagreement as to the nature of off. The challenge is to make the most of the situation you find yourself in, and few will argue that the viewpoint of quality on is a worthwhile goal. Information on the broad life topic is massive, but processing all the info is daunting. That is where wisdom enters the picture. Sorting out truth and falsehood and making sense of accurate information can be defined as wisdom. We exist in a sea of facts and claim facts that can drown a person. Wisdom is a life-saving system that can allow you to swim or plane on the water. Lack of wisdom is closely connected to drowning. What is true and what is false and what is going on are questions that we all are forced to evaluate. The implications are real and personal. What is accurate information? And what is disinformation? In information conflict battles, who is guilty of disinformation when both sides toss out the accusation? What is honestly stated information and what is true information which is blended with a spin or a viral rider that transforms the revelation into a toxic brew? What is true and what is partially true or temporarily true? Consider how time impacts information. It is accurate information that leaping off a cliff for a short time period provides an exhilarating sensation as you fall. But how does time enter into the practical evaluation of this information? A lot of information replicates this example. When does excess, accurate information become chaff-like and inhibiting to successful decision-making and decisive function? Are information battles new, or have they existed forever? With the Internet and an information overload faced by everyone, these are questions that bombard us constantly. How are you finding the information jungle? What do you know for sure? Why not start with, I am alive and thinking? What are the underlying implications of such a simple existence and performance fact that you could be quite confident of? Dead people and those who have not been born do not have this invaluable baseline, nor are they the least bit troubled by such, nor by anything for that matter. Is it possible that such a simple personal summary provides an effective window to wisdom? And yes, very much so. Brilliant concepts pop up in all sorts of unexpected but common places. A great example is the fictitious Sherlock Holmes character created by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Sir Arthur used a very real principle to craft plots that readers could relate to. Really, he slapped his readers with a version of reality. Consider the fabricated Sherlock statement. Watson, once you establish a solid fact A, then you often know that B and C are also facts. The logic is solidly attached and flows. This isn't empty faith or unsupported speculation. This is elementary, my dear Watson, and a simple reality that most people fail to make use of. For example, you intentionally make a trip around the world and arrive home and know, fact A, that you did it. Fact B, you know that the world is a sphere and isn't flat. and facts C, you know that any flat earth advocate is deluded, generally ignorant, and very likely a fool in other areas when it comes to reasoning or appreciating and utilizing common sense. The capacity to be accurately suspicious of influences is very helpful. I will toss in a secondary Sherlock angle. As a person lives and observes and experiences life, certain facts clarify, and linked facts also clarify. Highly visible realities that were always visible to you suddenly take on new importance that earlier you could not see. If you manage to form a solid factual base, increasingly you will be able to cross-reference facts and observations and make quite accurate guesses on multiple points. Albert Einstein stated that he sometimes felt that he was right, but he didn't know for sure. Living and thinking and aging can and usually does have an effect on wisdom development. An olden-time philosopher named August Bach, 1785 to 1867, made the solid observation that the most effective path to understanding is via analyzing a topic that is close to you and where you have factual reality at your fingertips. So again, you are alive. That very real fact has major implications and also means that you are connected to right now reality. So let's go. Let's call this Plan A. Flashback to Agus's tactic of forcing students to analyze seemingly simple specimen samples for amazingly long periods of time. The detailed analysis process of your basic existence, reality, inevitably leads to questions that radiate out from the initial attack point, and you will discover that you have started reading a serial book to which there is no end. But you have a solid anchor point, and you will remember the details of your pathway as you gradually progress to greater understanding. Factually connected understanding. An Agassiz spin-off thought. Few people appreciate how much information is linked to a single fact. Prolonged analysis and probing and connecting thoughts is a skill that only a few individuals utilize. A pity. Life is like driving along a curved road at high speed, and applying this patient and simple skill can allow you to avoid a lot of quite terrible accidents at blind corners. Which is easier to remember? A collage of disconnected snapshots or a single large, clear, detailed picture? You function on a solid foundation of connected facts that you have personally established with considerable effort and thought. You have connected to right now reality, and if careful, can retain that connection. Common sense is a good term in that lessons driven home by our interactions with our environment usually have a close connection with thoughtful observation and tested application. There is a vital explanation for this baked-in rationality. The hard logic of experience knocks empty dreams and flights of fantasy in the head. When a detail of reality clashes with theory, back off and think. Why? In an earlier presentation, I tossed up the concept that we all live in a type of educational stereo environment. That realization rides on an application of the multi-layer, incredibly integrated and time-tested situation we find ourselves in combination with the performance-proven written data sheet of the Bible. So the common concept of common sense being baked into everything we touch and do is explained by this concept and reinforces the concept. Integrated, multifaceted complexity can only occur in relationship to a mind linked with creative power. So our own mind, when our eyes are open and not blinded by disinformation fog, can plainly see the mega-personality aspect of everything we look at and experience. A bit ahead in this presentation, you will be presented with the concept of absorbing knowledge. Because we live in such a complex and interconnected environment, it is impossible to learn everything at once. And solid understanding is built on layers of knowledge and interconnected pockets of knowledge, some of which form sooner than others. And logical connections between those layers and pockets also takes time to form. Thus, the observation that we absorb knowledge comes from a man who appreciated this time-sensitive complexity of living. We live and do and think and observe, and gradually put the pieces together that jointly support effective wisdom. Young university graduates tend to hit the work world thinking they are highly knowledgeable and usually fail to progress until that vanity bubble is deflated by confrontations with reality. Vitamins are vital, but an overload can be useless or perhaps damaging. Fact overload may result in the debilitating fathead syndrome. To complicate absorbing further, reality itself has an extended time facet that dwarfs the human lifespan. How do you process that reality effectively? The common story of the fox and the hedgehog may capture the challenge of effective wisdom development well. The story states that the fox knows many things, but the hedgehog knows one big thing. It is good to be active and inquisitive like the fox, but the system of life is so large and complex and spread over so much time that a simple, short-duration human mind is dwarfed by its existence environment. Even the mass of human minds is dwarfed. There is too much to understand and absorb and not enough time in one lifetime. Thus, some type of unifying concept is essential to allow all the specialized facets of the whole to make sense to the small individual. How do you find your way through the thick jungle? How do you effectively combine the hedgehog grounded approach with the dynamic and active fox approach? Bach seems to have appreciated the challenge. If you begin your mission on a much broader level, let's call it Plan B, where you are relying on conjecture and stories from others, areas where you must accept the speculations or the credibility of others on trust, there is a high likelihood that you will beat your wings on air and your mental efforts will flit here and there and provide nothing solid to hold on to. Intelligence and fox power may be squandered. You risk being directed on faulty faith-based flights of fantasy that, at best, hang on the historic folly of others. The approach is associated with lacking the capacity to evaluate whether you're being influenced by wise or foolish thinkers. By combining initial Air 1 and Air 2 and Air 3, it is relatively simple to fabricate a custom viewpoint that, given your faulted base being accepted as true, seems quite reasonable. The approach can be seen as being solidly grounded on blocks of Swiss cheese or perhaps Limburger cheese, the smell being symbolically accurate. To dramatize the environment we are working in, consider two observations made by a physicist with proven mental powers, Albert Einstein. Any intelligent fool can make things bigger and more complex. It takes a touch of genius and a lot of courage to move in the opposite direction. Also, based on years of observation, Einstein stated, "Only two things are infinite, the universe and human stupidity, and I'm not sure about the former." The in-a-box exercise provides a common sense lesson that is simple yet vital in an environment where most people around you are heavily invested in Plan B reasoning. They start with a brilliant theory pulled out of somebody's imagination and then strive to prove the theory. Proof, creativity, once the initial revelation is dreamed up, is often equally as brilliant. And the stress on words and the star symbol on the screen stress or indicate my skeptical viewpoint of the accuracy of the basic terms used to with regard to the inspired thinker. The pressure of the current mindset causes most people to ignore their own common sense and to stick with or to buy into thinking that is popular and is totally bonkers. The illustration of a classroom of students who have been instructed to vote for answer B to a question put forward by the teacher, while an experimental individual in the test isn't aware of the stacked deck, tells the story. The odd man out initially thinks that answer A is correct, but it's hard to go against the flow. But for those who cling to an honestly applied plan A, the results and eventual rewards that accrue exponentially over time, will border on miraculous. Louis Agassiz functioned on Plan A and paid little attention to Charles Darwin and those of like mind who operated on Plan B. Agassiz chose to live much closer to reality, which caused him to ignore conventional religious spokesmen as well as theorists like Darwin. Agassiz took a dim view of faith-based speculation. Interestingly, Darwin seemed to give conventional religionists credibility on issues that he personally felt were diabolical, and this may well have motivated his evolutionary enthusiasm. And again, the use of evolutionary is a word that is loaded. Consider Darwin's concerns. I hardly see how anyone ought to wish Christianity to be true, for if so, the plain language of the text seems to show that the men who do not believe, and this would include my father, brother, and almost all my best friends, will be everlastingly punished. And this is a damnable doctrine. Now, how can you disagree with Darwin's concerns? But is the Bible and its author that simplistic and brutal? Are some or perhaps many religious authorities who were and are effective influences missing some vital angles and biblical complexities and selling the boss short? Darwin's understanding of God was such that he had good reason to want to blank his vision of the entity out. Agassiz didn't care much what religionists thought, and said, and his own view of God was formed by his dedication to the science of reality. As he aged and his experience increased, it was increasingly obvious to him that he was wallowing in a brilliantly designed mega-system, and he could see by the size and complexity of the tracks of the designer that he was rubbing shoulders with a brilliant giant who appeared to him to be a great guy and not a short-sighted, narrow, irrational, judgmental, grudge-holding ogre. Darwin's excitement with regard to his impossible theory can be accurately called the theory of interrelated complexity existing without the involvement of brains connected to creative tools. And this amazed Agassiz and put Darwin, in Agassiz's view, at a level that was far less reasonable than that of most of the religionists. Agassiz lived a life of dynamic action, but his focus was somewhat hedgehog. Unfortunately, some of his fox-like speculative excursions got him into trouble, in part due to bad actors playing up some of his wanderings along with hijacking his proven and glowing basic reputation. And at his death, his influence was quickly pushed off the table. For example, Agassiz came from a very cultured background, and he was so shocked by the miserable condition of the black American slaves that he speculated that they were a separate creation from whites. He knew creative complexity depended on a designer, but a few of the details of life in 1850 in the USA rattled his long-term logic somewhat. Far from any of these three thinkers mentioned here was a seemingly inconsequential personality who lived a full and pleasantly successful life named Jim Corbett. To an observant person, Corbett could be seen as a Plan A thinker and doer, and practical reality scientist who thoughtfully observed and worked from the basics under his nose and advanced to much more complex issues. In his small world, his approach seemed to give him abilities that to others looked like superpowers. In his old age, Corbett applied his common sense wisdom to writing and thankfully shared many aspects of his thinking in a very readable manner. Even Ernest Hemingway had a full collection of Corbett's books, which he admired. Totally apart from a full and balanced vocational career, Corbett developed a significant reputation for being able to hunt down man-eating cats in India, man-eaters that no one else seemed to be able to apprehend in an environment that tipped the scale highly in favor of the man-eater. British government officials leaned on Corbett to deal with a string of these highly disruptive situations, and Corbett obliged without any form of compensation other than his satisfaction of helping the people living under the threat of these rogue animals. He refused to adopt the role of a bounty hunter, and his approach said a lot about his personal moral standards. Consider an informative insert. Here, Corbett is pictured with the expired leopard of Rudraprayag. Corbett, between the ages of 32 and 36, hunted down 3 man-eating cats. The 3 had killed well over 800 people between them. Other hazardous hunts followed. The tasks were no small achievement, as many others had tried to execute the killers, but without even a hint of success. Conditions were highly in favor of the cats, and it was a tough call as to who was the hunter and who was the hunted. Corbett commented on the situation. Fear may not be a heritage to some fortunate few, but I am not of their number. After a lifelong acquaintance with wildlife, I am no less afraid of a tiger's teeth and claws today than I was the day that a tiger shooed my dog, Magog, and me out of the jungle in which he wanted to sleep. But to counter that fear and hold it in check, I now have experience that I lacked in those early days. Where formerly I looked for danger all around me and was afraid of every sound I heard, I now know where to look for danger and what sounds to ignore or pay special attention to. And further, where there was uncertainty where a bullet would go, there is now a measure of certainty that it will go in the direction I want it to. Experience engenders confidence, and without these 2 important assets, the hunting of a man-eater on foot and alone would be a very unpleasant way of committing suicide. Notice Corbett's comment on learning what sounds to ignore and what sounds to pay attention to. In the internet, social media age, his words take on an analogy value that he was unable to foresee. But the encapsulated value is real and has major current applications. Corbett was on to the wisdom track. With regard to his hunting experiences, we have a snapshot of the altruistic and methodical Corbett who, then, as a career capstone, by staggering fluke, happened to have the honor of single-handedly guarding Princess Elizabeth from terrorists during the night that she became queen, in an African treehouse of all places. How often has a princess of if not the, world's most significant royal family been in an African treehouse the moment her father, thousands of miles away, unexpectedly dies at home, and while she is being guarded by an elderly man who, out of the blue, was invited to the gathering due to his sterling reputation of service, linked to many hours of sitting in trees while attempting to save others from murderous predators. An interesting connection to the beginning of what became a remarkably long and successful rule. Shortly after, terrorists did attack and destroy the treehouse. A section from one of Corbett's books is a wonderful illustration of Plan A style as well as an illustration of an ideal student of life outlook. I feel, too, that the Corbett story can be seen as an appreciation that the system of life is a unified single system with myriad facets that accurately reading and understanding the book of nature provides an endless study of a massive, interconnected, and perhaps endless system in which we all exist. Bach, Agassiz, and Corbett in many ways were on the same page. When Corbett talks about jungle lore or the book of nature, he could just as easily have substituted life. If you were to study his life, you would likely realize that there were three areas where he had extensive knowledge: the jungle, tigers, and life in general. He was into observing and learning from reality. Fictional dreamland diversions did not seem to be a zone he had any interest in, and his patient focus on real substance served him well over a lifetime. Corbett's life may well illustrate that true religion is not defined as sitting in a church for a few hours every so often listening to a supposed expert, but is a minute-by-minute exposure to and involvement with all that is life while keeping your mind open to the lessons being presented to you from wherever. To quote a seemingly inspired song segment, "Sit by my side, come as close as the air, and wander in my words and listen to the pictures that I play." These words only make sense if seen as an expression of a very big, competent, and involved personality. So, Corbett's wise statement. I have emphasized elsewhere that jungle lore is not a science that can be learnt from textbooks, but it can be absorbed a little at a time, and that the absorption process can go on indefinitely, for the book of nature has no beginning as it has no end. Open the book where you will, and at any period of your life, and if you have the desire to acquire knowledge, you will find it of intense interest, and no matter how long or intently you study the pages, your interest will not flag, for in nature there is no finality. Today it is spring, and the tree before you is bedecked with gay bloom. Attracted by this bloom, a multitude of birds of many colors are flitting from branch to branch, some drinking the nectar from the flowers, others eating the petals, and others again feeding on the bees that are busily collecting honey. Tomorrow the bloom will have given place to fruit, and a different multitude of birds will be in possession of the tree. And each member of the different magnitudes has its allotted place in the scheme of nature, one to beautify nature's garden, another to fill it with melody, and yet another to regenerate the garden. Season after season, year after year, the scene changes. A new generation of birds in varying numbers and species adorn the tree. The tree loses a limb, torn off in a storm, gets stack-headed and dies, and another tree takes its place. And so the cycle goes on. The knowledge you absorb today will be added to the knowledge you will absorb tomorrow. The amount of knowledge you ultimately accumulate will depend on your capacity for absorption, not on any fixed standard. At the end of the accumulating period, be that period 1 year or 50, you will find that you're only at the beginning, and that the whole field of nature lies before you waiting to be explored and to be absorbed. But be assured that if you are not interested, or if you have no desire to acquire knowledge, you will learn nothing from nature. I walked with a companion for 12 miles through a beautiful forest from one camp to another. It was the month of April, and nature was at her best. Trees, shrubs, and creepers were in full bloom. Gaily colored butterflies flitted from flower to flower, and the air, filled with the scent of flowers, throbbed with the sound of birds. At the end of the day, my companion was asked if he had enjoyed the walk, and he answered, "No, the road was very rough." I was traveling shortly after World War I from Bombay to Mombasa in the British India liner Carrigola. There were 5 of us on the upper deck. I was going to Tanganyika to build a house. The other 4 were going to Kenya, 3 to shoot, and 1 to look at a farm he had purchased. The sea was rough, and I'm a bad sailor, so I spent most of my time dozing in a corner of the smoke room. The others sat at a table nearby playing bridge, smoking, and talking, mostly about sport. One day, on being awakened by a cramp in my leg, I heard the youngest member of the party say, "Oh, I know all about tigers. I spent a fortnight with a forest officer in the central provinces last year." Admittedly, 2 extreme cases, but they well serve to emphasize my contention that if you are not interested, you will see nothing but the road you walk on, and if you have no desire to acquire knowledge and assume that you can learn in a fortnight what can't be learned in a lifetime, you will remain ignorant to the end. In the super-complex system of life, solid learning is never linear. You are confronting a complex, interconnected whole, and you learn a little here and a little there, and gradually an increasingly accurate picture of reality has the potential to form in your mind. This process takes time, and personal effort certainly helps. Corbett was no fool and recognized that absorbing was a more accurate term for describing the development of wisdom than simply talking about learning volumes of isolated facts. That Corbett puts an emphasis on absorbing knowledge, it would seem that he had applied the lesson prior to advocating for others to do the same. It would also seem that he had tapped into the spiritual side of the stereo environment we live in, and he had forces on his side besides his own competence and mental powers. He did not make a big issue of it, but he did indicate that there were times when he felt he was guided by what he called a sixth sense. Proverbs 22:29 states, "Do you see a man diligent in his business? He shall stand before kings, he shall not stand before unknown men." There is little evidence that I am aware of that Corbett went out of his way to dramatize that he was a religious person, apart from his consistent operating style of altruism, competence, common sense, and obvious appreciation that we do not exist in a bowl of godless chaos soup. He was clearly impacted by the Bible, but didn't make a show of the fact other than basic conduct that anyone would optimistically hope for and be impressed by. If you study his writings and reports from the many individuals who had contact with him or knew him well, you have got to be impressed with the line he cut. Though he was English at a time when such folk often had an iffy reputation in foreign lands, native Indians clearly had unusually high regard for him, and there were solid reasons for their feelings. Long-term actions, not self-promotion, backed the substance of their respect. It was typical of the English system at that time for those born in the mother country to look down on those who were born elsewhere, and such people, Corbett being an example, did not cash in on the perks reserved for the elite, home-generated class. This did not seem to be an issue for Corbett, who applied himself to a very basic lifestyle, and in whatever he did, his solid moral values and work ethic were evident. Frederick Henry Royce, who lived at approximately the same time as Corbett, applied the motto, "Whatever is rightly done, however humble, is noble." The Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, arguably a major factor in the Battle of Britain, as well as the renowned Rolls-Royce Automotive Company, were results of F.H. Royce's efforts and impact. And Corbett's similar operating style also delivered a type of solid success that didn't tarnish with time. Both men won their game by simple, modest, and dedicated performance without being privileged by a system, a favoritism, or inherited opportunity, wealth, or prestige. Human society goes through ups and downs, good times and bad, expansions and contractions, and cause and effect can be seen as the underlying factor. Some gyrations appear to be due to random circumstance or behind-the-scenes manipulation, and many appear to be the result of mass dives by society as a whole into highly irrational, self-amplifying thought and action patterns. The majority of Earth's inhabitants are impacted, but likely have minimal appreciation of the exact dynamics of which they experience, for the moment at least. Lifetimes are simply too short to appreciate the magnitude of the life system and how it works, and details like start and end and push and jump and bump and blunder. Thankfully, no one has to endure the ongoing rat race, gyrations and unfoldings for more than 70 to 100 years, and during each life experience unit, individuals usually can, if they so desire, squeak out a niche in which they can basically thrive and largely resist the negative winds of compiled system defects that surround them. I am unfamiliar with details of August Boak's life, but Agassiz, Corbett, and Royce made good use of their lives despite enduring all sorts of hardships and seeming negative hits, many complements of antagonistic human systems that were in vogue during their lifetimes. But each of them had drive and purpose and principle, and ended the game looking good. In hindsight, I am sure all of them would have been pleased with their kick at the cat, and not too upset at getting a break from the arduous push. Each of them would have learned a great deal from their own efforts, as well as learning from the positive and negative antics of those around them, current and historic. A couple of quotes I find interesting. Royce pointed out that small things make perfection, but perfection is no small thing. Corbett observed that hunting tigers on foot has never been a popular sport, and hunting man-eating tigers on foot is even less popular. Such stated observations, combined with the actual performance and final reputation of the speakers, say a great deal about how their minds developed over their lifetime. Anyone interested in learning from the success of others can learn a great deal from the study of these historic achievers. An observation from Corbett's ride is supportive of my contention that there is an obvious connection between the physical reality and the Bible and the joint author of both. Corbett's simple gravestone indicates that he had some appreciation of the Bible's statements on a planned human resurrection, and the Proverbs 22:29 scripture laid down long before Corbett lived could be seen as predictive of Corbett's unusual contact with Queen Elizabeth in his dying years. A further unusual and puzzling fluke of Corbett's man-eater hunts was how, after multiple attempts at killing his target, time after time he confronted venomous snakes, which he dispatched, followed shortly by success at shooting the elusive cat. Corbett's survival under frightful physical conditions and his ultimate repeated, very often fluky successes add to the story. So another biblical statement from Psalms 91 seems to support the thinking that Corbett had unseen but very real assistance in his altruistic struggles. Psalms 91 reads, "For he will give his angels charge over me to keep me in all my ways. They shall bear me up in their hands, lest I dash my foot against a stone. I shall tread upon the lion and the adder. The young lion and the serpent shall I trample under foot. Because he has set his love upon me, therefore he will deliver me. He will set me on high, because I have known his name. I shall call upon him, and he will answer me. He will be with me in trouble. He will deliver me and honor me. With long life he will satisfy me and show me his salvation." Corbett was buried a few feet from Robert Baden-Powell, a true Englishman with impressive credentials, both having been buried in the same graveyard at Nyeri, Kenya. Baden-Powell was no slouch, but consider Corbett's modest and God-connected gravestone to the rather proud and personal statement, on Robert's grave. Now with that, I'll take a break and then cut into part 2. And in that section, the first thing I'll deal with is what I would call agents of counter-wisdom, which I feel are a very significant force. So, hope you'll follow that, and that section then will complete the entire presentation on wisdom.